might be a little unrealistic. Religion is a very, very powerful force. They wield enormous power, and it worries me how many are religious. It's quite extraordinary, the numbers that it can track. When I used to look at the million or so people gathered on the beach in Rio, to realize that just how powerful religion is and can be for some people. And sometimes I think, well, there's no choice. We're going to have to work with these people, even though you might find it pretty distasteful. But I think it's brave words that you say, but I think that realistically we do have to speak to religious people. We do have to find some common ground. And that is why in Scotland we are not saying, look, we're just going to get religion completely out of schools. We're saying, look, ask parents first. That's all we ask. Ask parents first before you indoctrinate children. And the Scottish Secularist Society will be going up against a panel in Holyrood in Parliament here in Scotland in September to do just that. Small steps, and I think we can do it. But as I said, they're so powerful, and we have to be realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the problem, if I can be completely frank. I think that the thing is that the 11-year-old girl who says she doesn't want to be forcibly married is also being unrealistic from your perspective then, because that's the law of the land. She just better pull up her boots and deal with it. But the point is that people want and dream and hope for a different life, a better life. And they deserve it no matter where they live. And if you look at the 33 million people coming out on the streets of Egypt, the biggest contemporary movement against Islamism. And many of those people are also religious. The point is that you can't make the assumption that just because someone is religious, like my father, who's a Muslim, or my mother, or many of my uncles and aunts and my grandparents, that they want to live under Sharia or Islamic rules. In fact, many of these people have fled if they could, and many of them are battling Islamism and religious laws. It's basically street-to-street combat in a lot of instances, even on a simple issue like the veil. You have, the Iranian authorities constantly trying to set down directives against women who they consider improper veiling. And they arrest and fine countless women. In one city alone, in 1 month, 1 million women were arrested or fined for improper veiling, according to their own statistics. And again, just last week, even, mannequins are fined if they're not properly veiled. Mannequins, forget about women and girls. And just recently, the head of the police said, if we don't clamp down on improper veiling will be banished from Iran. It will be gone because no one will listen to us if we don't arrest and clamp down. That is resistance. The 30-odd years of Islamic rule of force, where the veil actually was imposed on people by throwing acid in women's faces and arresting and imprisoning mass numbers of women. Despite this, after 30-odd years, where 70% of the population were born under Islamic rule and never knew anything but wearing a veil, you see this resistance. And I think the point is, Gary, that we should, salute that resistance, show solidarity with it, rather than calling it unrealistic. I'm sorry, I just have one other thing to say, because this is one of my pet peeves, is the fact that I am so tired of hearing. And again, this is not about what you said, Gary, but I'm just adding to, some of the problems I face often in the campaign work I do, is this call from humanists and secularists to be pragmatists. And, my position is pragmatism never changed the world. We are not sitting here today with the rights and freedoms we have because secularists before us, the avant-garde before us, were pragmatists because they were realistic. If the people fighting against slavery were told, be realistic, this is the way things are, you can't change it, nothing would change. And I think this is, if I leave anything today about, you know, what my call is basically, is that, look, it's important. These are not just, you know, issues. We're not having a theoretical debate. We're not debating for the fun of debating. There are people's lives at stake. An 11-year-old girl in Yemen, you know, 2 young women in Pakistan who have recently been stoned to death merely for, been killed for dancing in the rain, a woman who's been stoned to death because she had a mobile phone on her, and on and on and on. And I think in that sense, I think realism is the death.
I'm inspired by what you say, Maryam. I mean, I'm inspired by your energy.
Any sort of real solidarity.
I absolutely support you. And as far as the 11-year-olds, I have watched that video, and it's plain and simple. It's abuse, and it's religious abuse. And I think we do have to be strong. We have to grow a spine, and we have to stand up to that treatment. But something you said yourself, amongst those people in Egypt are men and women who, and indeed children, if you ever saw that lovely video of that young boy on the streets being interviewed, are people who are religious, who are joining with the secular movement. And I think that that's a fantastic thing. And I think we can work with that.
Yes, most definitely. And I think the problem, though, is the problem starts with secularists. You know, the problem starts with secularists. There are many religious people who are secularism, and I would dare to say that the greatest defenders of secularism are definitely not those living in Europe, for sure, because many of them are very, very, you know, are too realistic, really, and too pragmatist in this day and age, where we need to defend these sort of universal values, values that, you know, were taken for granted just a few decades ago and no longer are. I would dare to say that a vast majority of secularists are people who live in the Middle East and North Africa and Asia, because they, you know, I don't think anyone understands the threats of Sharia law better than those who have to live under it. You know, the woman who loses child custody, I have a child, a 7-year-old. I can't imagine the fact that because he is now 7 years old, if I was separated from my husband, that he would no longer be with, I could no longer have custody of him, because a child of 7, a boy of 7 no longer needs his mother. He's the father's child now. I would no longer be able to see my son anymore. You know, this is an issue. I get calls all the time from women across the world crying about losing child custody, about the fact that a Sharia judge has told them to stay in a violent situation because, you know, that is the prerogative of the husband. I've even had cases where a man sexually abused the child, and the woman was told that it was her fault that the husband sexually abused the child because she wasn't servicing him well enough for him to have to go to the child for sexual satisfaction. What I'm saying is that, you know, none of this outrage can be justified and, you know, in a sense ignored by sort of, you know, this sort of very, what do you call it, namby-pamby, very soft, oh, well, you know, we can't force our ways on people. It's not about forcing our ways on people, it's a fight. Look, the EDL, the English Defence League and the British National Party are in the streets, they are fighting. The Islamists are in the streets and fighting. Where are the secularists? They are in the streets and fighting in the Middle East and North Africa and Asia, but I don't see very many of them standing strong in support and solidarity of their fellow citizens, not just in the Middle East, North Africa and Asia, but in Britain itself. I find that shocking and appalling, really, and I am getting really sick and tired of it, to be quite frank.
Okay, Gary, we'll let you have one more question and then we need to move on, okay?
Well, I have to go, but I have to say I am inspired by Maryam's